try to do this without mics. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's great, because most Jewish audiences, they can't hear you. No, it's true.
But most Jewish speakers are loud.
But most Jewish speakers are very loud. No, it's actually very funny. I was speaking a couple of weeks ago at a Jewish organization with an audience that was somewhat older than this, and I got up and I was introduced, and a woman yelled out from the back, "We can't hear you." And I said, "That's because I haven't started talking yet." I mean, it was like, "You want to talk about preemptive war?" I mean, it was like, she wasn't even waiting. First of all, thank you very much for that introduction, and also thank you for allowing us to keep these cups. I'm very excited about my Harvard Hillel cup. And we're really glad to be here. I'm really glad to be here with my friend Ari Shavit. This is something that we talked about several months ago, trying to go directly to campuses and have Ari speak to as many young American Jews and others as possible to talk about the moment that we're in, the historical moment as Jews and as Americans. What we're going to do is try to have a little bit of a conversation here, and then as quickly as possible sort of pivot to you guys and particularly the students to ask your questions and raise your concerns and anything you want to talk about. But let me just start by way of introduction. A couple of months ago in Washington, right when the book came out, Ari was speaking at an event I was hosting. And in the course of talking about his book, he described himself as a, quote, fanatical Zionist. On one hand, I wasn't surprised by this self-description because I know him to be an Israeli patriot. On the other hand, it was surprising on two counts. The first is that the word Zionist is not currently, let's say, one of the more politically correct self-designations to use, especially in liberal circles. And the second was, I know how Ari thinks about the world and all its complications. And by that I mean, you are on the one hand an Israeli patriot who understands and sympathizes with the plight of his country and who understands that it faces very real threats. On the other hand, you are not only one of the most important critics of the occupation of the West Bank, but you're one of the earliest critics, and you're very early involved in peace now and in working for civil rights in Israel and in the occupied territories. So I was a little surprised by that, and I was hoping maybe you could start just by talking about what it means in 2014 to be a fanatical Zionist.
Means to be in danger. Thank you so much, Jeff. It's always great to be with Jeff. Who's one of the greatest journalists I know, and one of the greatest people I know. And in several ways, he's like one of the godfathers of this book, and one of the reasons I'm here. And it's really great pleasure for me to be here, because we'll talk about it later, but my greatest passion right now, following the publication of my book, is to be in dialogue with you guys. And I hope no one would be offended, but I especially refer to the ones who don't remember New York before. As you'll hear probably from me and from Jeff later, I think there is nothing more essential for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel, but to begin to restart the dialogue with you. I think that one of the greatest failures of Israel in recent years was that it did not reach out to young American Jews. And it's time to do it. And this is why both Jeff and I will talk a bit about ourselves, but the main thing we want to do tonight is to hear you, hear your questions, to see what your concerns are, and I hope we can have the most honest and deep dialogue possible. So I ask you now to think of the most difficult questions you think regarding Israel. I want to ask you, is there a reason for you to care about Israel? Where is Israel a source of pride for you? Where is Israel a source of embarrassment? Is Israel something that is really on your mind, or is just like imposed by some family members and organizations? I want us to get into a real, candid, honest conversation, both about our shared Jewish identity and about the meaning of Israel in our life. So in my mind, this is what the evening should really be about, and both Jeff and I share this. But to begin with, to put things in context, I'll answer your questions, and perhaps we'll talk a bit about the book and myself, but this is really just the appetizer. Look, one of the nicest lines written about my book so far was written by The Economist, that is not known to be a pro-Israeli or a philo-Semitic paper. And not only did they have a really beautiful review that was poetry itself, but the headline was Song for Zion, which is something probably no Economist reader has seen in a long time, with a photograph of two Olim immigrants from Yemen planting a tree in the 1950s. Not settlers, not ultra-Orthodox, not tanks, not Benjamin Netanyahu. Two immigrants to the Jewish state planting a tree. And the line was, the striking line for me was, that after such a long time that Zionism was dragged in the mud, my book gives Zionism a sense of nobility. And the moment I read that line, I said, well, perhaps I did do something wrong. But there was a nicer line, which I heard in several places when I spoke around the country, which was that the book, made Zionism sexy. And that's even more important. So we leave aside the book and what was achieved or not. But this is the thing. I think that if, for such a long time, with the combination of Israel's own mistakes, but with a deep, unfair treatment by much of the Western media and much of the Western academic institutions or intelligentsia circles, Israel was treated, I would say it was attacked, criticized, much more than justified. Israel is involved in all kinds of problems and wrongdoings, and I'm the first one to admit it and to talk about it in a fair and direct way. But what happened is that we lost the context. We really lost the bigger picture and the bigger narrative, which is what I tried to rewrite in my book. And the fundamentals are, I'll try to describe them briefly in a few minutes. The fundamentals are that at the end of the day, this might look strange in today's North America, where the Jews seem so successful and affluent and free and proud and strong. But at the end of the day, the Jewish people is one of the loneliest people there is. This is a people that has contributed so much to civilization. People that contributed so much to humanity. And a people that was so persecuted for millennia. We are the ultimate other of Europe. We are the ultimate other of many of the other grand Christian nations. And in the 20th century, our drama and our tragedy reached a peak. And let no one forget this. So may you all think about your great-grandparents or your grandparents' grandparents. Where were they? Most of them lived in poverty, in disgrace, having no rights, no equality, no liberty. So this people, this homeless people, deserve to have a home of its own. And the fact that Zionism, what is Zionism? Zionism is a movement that built in a miraculous way a home for homeless people. So are we wrong on certain issues? We are wrong. Are there flaws? There are flaws. Unlike you, we have wrinkles. We are a bit ugly at times. We make bad decisions. There are problems with it. We're not perfect. We are not some marble statue of perfection. But not only are we human, we are an amazing human endeavor. And this is why I'm a fanatic Zionist. And I'm proud to be. And if anyone will damn me for that, I'll be proud to be that. Because at the end of the day, this not only is Jews, not only is Israelis. When you look at this with some fairness, with a universal approach, you see that this is the people that deserve to create what it created, and it did it in a wondrous way. And I think that rather than be criticized and haunted and persecuted, we should set actually example for other minorities and other peoples that have similar problems. We should be an example to them, an inspiration. So there is nothing in my mind more distorted than this overwhelming attack on Zionism, this blindness to see that Zionism was needed, this blindness to see that Zionism is basically right, and this blindness to see that Israel is a miraculous, is a man-made miracle that deserves support and love and criticism. Does that answer your question?
It gets to it. Yeah, but let's keep going. No, it's an interesting start, but the question that I've heard from millennials, from the Jews who are now in college, is one of the biggest challenges, I think, to the Zionist vision, which is this. I mean, you look around you. I mean, we're sitting at America's premier university. We're in this beautiful Jewish building, maybe architecturally challenged building, but still beautiful, wondrous, full acceptance. The presidents of most of the Ivy League schools are Jewish or recently been Jewish. And the thing I hear is, Israel, okay, I get, that's nice, but I mean, we are living, this is not exile. We're living in America, we're almost half of the world's Jews. And we live here in this country where we're fully accepted, where the greatest challenge, if you will, is assimilation, not anti-Semitism. So why do we still need this particularistic Jewish country in the middle of the desert surrounded by people who don't want it there? I mean, maybe you could justify it 80 years ago, but I hear this question. What's the justification for it now when we have all this?
Thank you for the question.
You're welcome. We didn't plan that.
First of all, I'd say something short about what I see as like Jewish existence before we get into it.
Just a brief comment on Jewish existence.
Because I think the beauty of Judaism throughout, again, with people wrestling between tribalism and universalism, and I hear that sentiment, and to an extent I understand it, and I was both a peace activist and a human rights activist. I have all that in my DNA. But the beauty of Judaism, it is indeed a tribe, but it's a tribe with a universal mission and with universal values. This is what our great contribution to civilization, and this is what we have with us. So it's true that there are some darker sides in Judaism, in Israel, in Judaism, that do not project that. But I think the challenge for all of us, you here, us there, anyone, is really to find that balance again, to find the beauty of a tribe, yes, a tribe, a family. If you don't like the word tribe, it's an extended family that has a universal mission. And I think that part of our mission today is to define the new universal missions of this tribe and to work on this, and to work together on this as American Jews, Israeli Jews, and others. So this is regarding the concept. But talking about Israel, I cannot use the word tragedy anymore because it's like taken by my book in a sense, but the irony, the sad thing is that the need for Israel is especially the need of you people, you young American Jews. Need Israel. Israel needs you, and you need Israel. And the reason is very simple. It is ultra-Orthodox Jews who do not need Israel. They'll maintain their tradition and their culture and their ways and their beliefs even if there is no Israel. An ultra-Orthodox ghetto can exist in Williamsburg, in Antwerp, anywhere. But the great insight of the early Zionists, which is so relevant today, that it's people like you and me and you that need Israel more than all. Because if there won't be a place that maintains that is a kind of powerhouse for non-Orthodox Jewish identity, the danger of us evaporating is huge indeed. And I'm sure that everyone here in the room realizes this. You live in an open society. Everything is open to you. Nothing forces you to be Jewish. The connection is in so many ways unclear. There is so much confusion. If there is not a place that gives a kind of anchor to whatever your variation of Jewish identity is, we are all in danger. These are not the old dangers of pogroms and anti-Semites and Cossacks. This is a kind of soft danger of us evaporating. So it's legitimate of every one of you to decide he doesn't want to be Jewish. Legitimate. But I wish that you do not make that choice. And if you make out of your free will, nothing in the world can force you. I think it's the role of the Jewish state, the role of the Jewish leadership, to try to seduce you, to be Jewish, to be proud Jews, and to find your relevant way of being Jewish. And this huge experiment, this is the greatest challenge that this community faces. And in my mind, this is the greatest challenge that Israel faces. You cannot do it without Israel, just as Israel cannot survive without you. So my answer is that while the old danger of pogroms and Cossacks and all that is gone, I hope forever, I'm not sure, but it's gone for the time it's not gone. In order to deal with the most relevant of challenges, we all need Israel. You need Israel, we need it, and it's the only guarantee to our future in whatever way we decide to define it. The beauty of Israel is that you do not have to be religious in this way or that way. It opens 1,000 options of how to define your own individual Jewish identity. But that's the beauty.
But let me just push back on that for a second, because people here, one of the ironies of Israel, I think, is that it is easier to be, there are more options available to Jews here spiritually than there are there. I mean, I can go to, a lesbian Reconstructionist rabbi and be married by that person. I can be married to anyone I want by that person, and the state is going to recognize it. In your country, the Orthodox rabbinate has a monopoly on it. It's one of the ironies of it, which gets me to the question that I think preoccupies a lot of American Jews of basically liberal bent. I think inside most American Jews, there's a war going on between the particularistic and the universalistic. This war is not going on inside Sheldon Adelson. I understand that. And it's not going on inside Chomsky. They have chosen, maybe it's going inside Chomsky. I don't know what's going on inside Chomsky. I don't really want to know what's going on. But for most Jews, outside of Williamsburg and Crown Heights, there is this there's this tension that's born of the fact that we come from a tribe that decided for itself to have a universal mission, or God decided for it, depending on where you come from on the spectrum. So you have this war, and now you have a situation in which the American Jewry, and I think we see this anecdotally, we see this in polls, American Jewry is moving in generally speaking, more liberal, universal, assimilated directions. Israel seems, and again, you might push back on this, but it seems from the outside to be moving toward a more kind of fundamentalist religious outlook, toward maybe a more tribal. Obviously, there's a strong faction in Israel that is that places an extreme value on possession of Jewish land over what you and I might think of as other Jewish values. So we seem. I mean, it goes back to this point you were making originally. The federations for years had this slogan, "We are one." And the only reason to say we are one is when you're not one. It's like when President Obama and Netanyahu say the bond between our countries is unshakable, it's shakeable. It's not shakeable, you don't have to talk about it. So the question for you is, and I'm hoping you could frame this through one of the central points of your book, the contradiction or the clash between occupation and intimidation. Which way is Israel going? And from your perspective, having been around America for a couple of months now, which way are we going? And is there some sort of inevitable separation that's going to take place?
So first of all, I hope not, as I can explain why it's so essential not to have that separation. And I believe, I'm basically an optimist, but let me get into the difficult stuff. First of all, I think that although we should have universal values, and again, I'm a living, walking testimony of that, we should not be ashamed of a particular identity. And especially in this country, I'm not an American and I'm only a visitor. The beauty of American pluralism is that you have Irish Americans, Afro-Americans, Italian-Americans, Polish-Americans, Latino-Americans, whatever. So why of all these identities that all have a base or an anchor that is a particular anchor of a specific old country, old identity, why of all these Jewish identity is wrong in any way? Why is Jewish identity referred to as a particular identity while all the others are okay? When you look back at our history, we can be proud. We can be proud, number one, of what we contributed and created over millennia. We can be proud of our contribution in the modern, enlightened world. The contribution of Jews, which I think is like a source for a new kind of Jewish identity. If you look at all the amazing things specific Jews have done in the last 200 years and how they shape all this modern, liberal, universal world we're in. And we can be proud of the great achievement of creating Israel there and creating this amazing American Jewish community here, of which this building, this institution, is a pillar. The fact that this building is here, this institution is here, should be a source of pride. This is not trivial. This is not trivial. This is an extraordinary achievement of a minority that pulled itself up and defended itself and created in a voluntary way. I'm not only talking about the individual success of so many Jews, which is so incredible,
the success of this community in maintaining this identity and this voluntary life, collective life, is astonishing. Don't let that go out the window. Your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents have achieved in this country something incredible. Be proud of that. Be proud of it. And see that it is challenged and look for the new ways of sustaining it and maintaining it. So this is, I think, finding the right balance between universalism and particularism is I think is right in every way. By the way, I think that leaving aside America, I think it's, when I think of humanity, it's the right approach. You want to belong to a family. The fact that you belong to a family does not mean that you are indifferent to others and that you are indifferent to others' suffering. And you can go and do good in the world. You can work on Tikkun Olam, Tikkun America, Tikkun whatever you want. While being Jewish and as Jewish, where's the contradiction there? There should not be a contradiction. And I think that this kind of attack on Jewish collective life, on Jewish people here and there, is deeply unjustified. And it has some evil sources that have to do with the way we were treated for such a long time. So let us not surrender to this. Let's not accept this. So this is about you. Now about Israel. Israel makes me very angry. Very angry. Because Israel's mission is to win your hearts. Israel must make itself attractive to all of you sitting in this hall. And if it's not attractive enough to all of you sitting in this hall, it is doing something wrong. So whether this wrongdoing is the way we build settlements in the West Bank, or whether this something wrong is the way some ultra-Orthodox circles treat women in Israel, or whether this is the way that the Reform movement and the Conservative movement are not giving their full rights in Israel, all this is outrageous. Outrageous. And it's outrageous twice. First of all, outrageous for us, because we should live in a fully pluralist, just society. This is what we need for ourselves, and this is what will make us strong as well. But two, it's almost crazy regarding you, because I so much believe that this bond is so essential. We must do everything, and we must get everything right, so Israel is attractive. Israel is something that you yearn for, you love. No one has to go there, no one has to move there. There are no obligations. As I said before, Israel must seduce you. This is what Israel must do, and it's not doing that.
Let me just interrupt, because I got a question. So you're a center-right Israeli, and you're hearing this, and you're saying, really? My ultimate job is not to survive in this horrible, brutal environment. My ultimate job is to make myself attractive so that people at Harvard like me? I mean, it seems, I don't know if you can sell that message in Israel.
I'll try.
But it's easy to sell at Harvard.
But I'll tell you why I actually think there's no difficulty, no contradiction. Because as I said once or twice today, this long, hard day that I'm having and enjoying. And this takes us into a completely different part of reality. Israel today has the military dangers facing Israel are very much diminished because of the collapse of the Arab armies around us. Some of all threats Israel faced are not there anymore, or they are suspended. I don't think they are gone, but they are suspended. The real threat Israel has to face Iran, Israel has to face the Palestinian issue, but the real threat to Israel is the loss of legitimacy. And in this sense, for our own security, so Israel is strong, militarily strong. As I said just a few hours ago, we don't have an F-15 program. Our F-15s are the best in the region, they can do anything.
We have a problem that our F-15s might not be able to take off, because the world will not let them take us off, even when there is a justified need to defend Israel's security and existence. So everything converges here. When I'm saying that we must make ourselves attractive to you people, it's in the way that we have to make ourselves, if not attractive, but understood by the international community. Now, I'm not a great admirer of the international community. It's hypocritical in many ways. I don't trust it. But we have to do our part. We are a small people, and basically, I don't want to say hated people, people that many people have a complex relationship with. So this, when you are small, and you know you have an issue with so much of the world, you have to clean your act. So it's true that they allowed the Russians to do what they never allowed us. They allowed the Chinese to do what they never allowed us. But China is a superpower. Russia is big and rich. We are a small country that must keep the moral high ground. The moral high ground is essential for our existence, for our security, and it's essential so you will be able to really love us. So I think there is everything here is actually in harmony. There is no, and I'm willing to say to anyone in Israel, whoever objects, and I think people, Israelis are, contrary to the image, Israelis are reasonable. And if you talk in a reasonable way with them, I think that they'll be convinced. And I think really that the irony, it's a crazy irony, that again, and don't get me wrong, I don't have anything against the ultra-Orthodox. I respect them, I actually like them in many ways, and I appreciate their culture, and so I just don't want them to impose their values on democratic liberal Israel. That's what I want them to be. I appreciate them in so many ways, but they cannot take over Israel. Why? Because the irony is that they create a situation where the people who need Israel most cannot relate to it, because it is perceived as some theocracy. It's not, by the way, it's not a theocracy, and I'll say something about it in a minute. So it's our job to reclaim this. As I said it before, for too long there's been an alliance between Tea Party America and Tea Party Israel. It's time to create an alliance between non-Tea Party America and non-Tea Party Israel. And this is what we must do.
I think it would be good at this point to just get some students to raise your hands and ask questions and see where we're at. And right over here, why don't we start?
Sure. To that, for speaking. My name is Nancy. I'm a freshman at Harvard.
Could you stand? Is that possible?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's pretty non-contentious to say that Israel is a response to the Holocaust. I think Zionist theory kind of has existed for a while throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, and Jews kind of trickled into the Israel-Palestine land, but the state itself was kind of propelled into existence by the Holocaust. That being said, there's been a lot of talking, like on Tablet magazine, about how the last few Holocaust survivors are dying. And so my question is, given that the Holocaust is a morally absolute event, meaning that there was a very clear evil side, I'd say like the Nazis, and very clear victims, Jews, homosexuals, political dissidents. And given that politics is never morally absolute, what would you say will be the legacy of the Holocaust going forward? And especially in reference to what you said about the kind of darker side of what Israel does. And also, could Israel have been propelled into existence without the Holocaust?
Again, Israel?
Could Israel have been propelled into existence without the Holocaust?
Thank you for the question. First of all, I slightly beg to differ, slightly, not totally. Because when you read the book, you see something that I was talking about today several times, that the brilliant thing about Zionism, that in many ways it tried to preempt the Holocaust. And as I like to say, it's not that the early Zionists knew that there will be a Holocaust. They did not know that what happened in the 1940s will happen. But they realized that Europe is becoming aggressive and dangerous and becoming a death trap to the Jews. And the brilliant thing about the early Zionists was that they tried to preempt a disaster. Again, they did not know that it will take the shape of gas channels. But they saw some mega pogrom, and they realized that Europe is going to, that there is no future for the Jews of Europe. And the amazing thing, and here I hope that those of you who will read the book and explore this matter beyond it, will see Israel in a new light, in the sense that what a remarkable human achievement it is. Even when Israel is not very beautiful, the towns are banal, life looks like just another consumerist society. The real fact, if you look at it deeply, is that Israel is a life-saving project, which succeeded. These people created the most amazing revolution possible, because they did not just give political rights, but they saved. They saved, and they saved us. So Israel is not, if Zionism did not build up what turned out to be Israel for 50 years before the Holocaust, 40, 50 years before, we wouldn't have been there. So we are not just the outcome of the Holocaust. The Holocaust had, beyond the human catastrophe, had two, and the national catastrophe, had two impacts. On the one hand, it's true that it speeded up the process of the international community, UN, recognizing us. That's true. But on the other hand, we lost 5-6 million people, of which probably a third or a half or more would have come. So those who describe Israel as just a result of outcome of the Holocaust, Israel was going to be anyhow. The Holocaust speeded the process, but the Holocaust also made our endeavor much more difficult. When we have demographic problems in Israel, it's because of Hitler. Hitler nearly won. He nearly won. And we, with superhuman effort, are fighting him all the time. We are still fighting him to this day. Hitler lost, but in his war against the Jews, he achieved a major victory. The one field where he really had impact on the way history is evolving is the Jews. So this is a struggle that is still with us. So in this sense, the Holocaust has a much more complex effect. But I want to say something about the legacy that you asked. I think that some of the problems that we have with Europe, for instance, perhaps with some progressive forces in this country, but I'll talk about Europe, is that we drew opposite lessons from Auschwitz. We came out of Auschwitz saying never again, in the sense that we will never be powerless again. We were so righteous for 2,000 years. We were the ultimate pacifists. We were better than Mandela and Mahatma Gandhi put together. We had no sovereignty, we had no king, we had no army, we had no police, nothing. We, in this sense, lived, talking of universal values, we were the ultimate universal entity. A people without the land, a people without the country, we're all spiritual, all we had was morality, religion, and benign ideas. Where did all this lead us? To the Auschwitz crematorium. This is where this led us. So we have every right to come out of Auschwitz saying, we will never be powerless again. And I think that to this day, it gives us a right, definitely to have the power that any nation and any people have. But I would say that anyone attacking us should bear this in mind. Because we, of all people, need some power, political power, and military power, and any sorts of state power, after what we experienced. And the irony is that when Europe built itself after World War II, it took the exact opposite lesson. Their conclusion was the opposite. After 300, 400 years of bloody wars in Europe, 1,000 years, but 300, 400 years ago especially, they said basically no use of power again. New Europe is built on actually a notion of, so they played an interesting game. Their basic idea, I think, it wasn't an idea, but actually pattern of behavior was, let's let the Americans defend us while we criticize them. That was the modus operandi. No European armies, no wars. And if we have to tackle the rough world out there, Uncle Sam will do it, and then we can demonstrate against Uncle Sam. That's a perfect arrangement. And this is one of the reasons when Europe is in such tension with Israel, I think there are some anti-Semitic elements. There is an anti-Semitic layer, but I don't think it's all down. But it has to do with the fact that Europe has a post-colonialist complex, and it has this kind of, I would say, kind of human right, peaceful religion that is based on Auschwitz, that is exactly the opposite of ours. And this is why the tension is so inherent between these two entities. So in this sense, I really thank you for the question, because I think there is something very deep there. And I do think when people try, I'm not, first of all, personally, thank God, I had no Holocaust experiences whatsoever. My family was in Britain and in Palestine. I have no family members who perished there. I did not grow up with parents shouting at me, like many of my friends. But I think that when we refer to our formative trauma, and people try to say, to mute us, not to let us talk about it, I'm really angry. Because as I like to say sometimes, the trauma of World War I, it's 100 years, still shapes the way the British Army fights. The trauma of losing so many soldiers in 1914 influences the British military today. The German inflation of the 1920s has an impact on the patterns that the German central bank and monetary policies have. Your recession, your depression, Great Depression, has an impact on the way the federal takes decisions today. So we, that experience the ultimate trauma of any people, we have no right to remember it and to have it as a kind of bedrock of our psyche. We should not be addicted to it. We should not abuse it. We should not behave as if this gives us a license to do whatever we want. But it's a legitimate part of our identity, and the fact that it is with us is not something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, in the back. And also, by the way, one of the things we're interested in hearing about from you guys is the sort of open Hillel, J Street issues. So if somebody wants to raise those, we're happy to deal with them. So maybe go ahead.
I'm Dan Rosen. I'm a second-year medical student here at Harvard. I don't have anything on the open Hillel, J Street.
That's okay. You can still speak.
I was curious what you talked a little bit about Israel needs to use the American Jewish population, but the American Jewish population doesn't owe anything back in regards to Israel. It's not a responsibility per se. I'm curious what you think of Israel's responsibility towards diaspora Jewry that doesn't take advantage, doesn't feel that connection with Israel, doesn't feel like they need the protection of Israel, or even believe, let's say, the post-Zionist idea. Does Israel still owe the diaspora Jewry have any responsibility towards them at all? Do they owe them that protection? And in regards to, past Israel has gone to Yemen, to Ethiopia, and extracted Jews from there, with rising anti-Semitism throughout Europe, but unfortunately on a much lower level also in America as well. What responsibility does Israel have the responsibility to, God forbid, have to intervene
answer the second question.
So with Israel has in the past had to intervene in other countries that would be a lot easier. I think this is years and years away. I would probably disagree with the characterization that pogroms are definitely something in our past, and that's not something to worry about. But with anti-Semitism on the rise in Europe, and that's,
does Israel have to intervene?
does Israel have the responsibility?
So I think I answered your first question, and I think the answer to the second question is self-evident, but I'll answer it briefly. Definitely Israel is responsible. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that we are in our, as Jeff said before, are these two great Jewish communities. I care very much about Jews elsewhere, but we have to look at it as it is. Part of the victory of Hitler is, and part of the processes, post-war process in Europe, is that European Jewry has dwindled in a striking way. I mean, there are pockets of Jews, but it's nothing compared to what you had in the past. So actually, Jewish future depends totally on these two great communities. And the two communities must work together. They must find a way. I mean, there is nothing I dread more than inner Jewish isolation. I don't want you to retreat into your own world and ignore us, and I don't want us to retreat into our own world and ignore it. And I think that I'm very, very critical of Israel in this sense. So I said what I said before about Israel having to make itself more attractive. But I'll add to that I think that Israel has to reach out in active ways to, I'm not afraid of, let's not be cautious. I want you to intervene in our lives. I want us to intervene in your lives. So I think that Israel needs to find all kind of creative ways to reach out to you and to see what your problems are. This is exactly one of the reasons I want to understand what's on your mind. And to help in dealing with it. So I don't see us soon sending shekels to Boston to help the American Jews in Boston. But if there are ways, I'll give you an example. I hear that there is, I hear more and more, that there is this program of affordable Jewish education in this country. Perhaps, I'm not sure, I didn't go into it, perhaps there are some ways that we can help to that. Perhaps if we'll send many teachers, it's kind of, I would love to have some sort of Jewish Peace Corps that does all kinds of things together, we helping you, you helping us, and both of us doing things with the world outside together. I would love that. I think that would be fun. But I can think of, we should think of a million other ways, but we definitely have that responsibility, and definitely we are the Jewish national hope, and we have a responsibility to any Jew in the world. If any Jew is in trouble in Africa or Asia or on the moon, we have to deal with it. It is our moral and national responsibility.
I've been very worried about the moon-based Jews. Yes, ma'am, right there, yeah.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sandra. I'm a senior here. Just to speak briefly to the Open Hillel point, I'm a member of Hillel and also a supporter of the BDS movement, so in that I'm technically not allowed to be speaking within Hillel under certain guidelines, so I would very much like Hillel to be open for that reason. But my question has to do with your...
Just please, if you could speak a bit slower, because
He's a foreigner.
I'm a foreigner.
So my question is about your vision of Zionism, and I would not say that I'm a Zionist. Maybe I'm a non-Zionist and anti-Zionist. I'm not sure, but when I speak to often people organizing within Boycott, Divestment and Sanction movement, organizing within Palestinian solidarity, they'll say that Zionism is racism, and I usually refute that, and I'll say, no, Zionism is not racism. But the vision of Zionism that you've articulated is based on a notion of Jews as a tribe, the tribe that must protect ourselves, that has faced common struggle in Europe, and we have risen above it together. And to me, that sounds like a racist vision of Zionism. And so I'm curious, do you, if you were me, how would you respond to the claim that, or how would you defend Zionism not being racism if your vision of Zionism is so predicated on Jews as a race?
Can I just ask you a question in response, which is, I spent years in the West Bank and Gaza covering Palestinian national movement, and the Palestinian national movement argues that Palestinians are a tribe and a people and should be defended and defend themselves and have a state of their own. Is the Palestinian national movement racist?
But by saying that, you've also proved that anti-Zionism isn't necessarily anti-Semitism. And I think the
Well,
problem.
can I just ask her to answer the question?
I mean, I haven't read any statements of the Palestinian national movement, but when I say I work with in Palestinian solidarity work, I work with the Palestinian civil society organizations that have called for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And I'm with a group, I'm a member of a group called Jewish Voice for Peace, and we are explicitly against racism in all forms, including.
No, but I guess what I'm saying is a Palestinian who wants a Palestinian state for Palestinians racist?
I don't think that most, like the Palestinian, for example, the Palestinian call for a Palestinian state is necessarily predicated on the idea that Palestinian is a racial identity.
Well, or ethnic identity?
I mean, I'm just talking about race, but it's not necessarily predicated on that either. It's predicated on the idea of self-determination.
No, I'm just curious how, the definitions here, but go ahead, Ari.
Well, you've said it all in your question. What's your name, please?
I'm Sandra.
Sandra?
Mm-hmm.
I'd love, if we'll have some time, I'd love to get into real deep dialogue, because truthfully, your question saddens me a bit, because of what Jeff said. I mean, first of all, I spent so much, I think, time and energy here talking about exactly a non-narrow tribal agenda. It was so important to talk about that, and it seems to me that as if you did not hear me. But beyond that, all of Europe, I mean, what you have in this country, the way this nation is built is different than most countries in the world. Most countries in the world are nation states. There is people that defines itself politically through a state. And you judge those nations, how they treat minorities. Do they give them their full rights as individuals and as minorities? This is the question, to be honest. Because if you go throughout, Holland is a nation state. Britain, the head of the British state is the head of the church. The British flag is all crosses. This is the way the world is run. America is exceptional in this sense. So I understand that sometimes Americans have difficulty in seeing this, because you have a different, the way you are structured is different. But 80-90% of the world is based on these ideas of different peoples. Sandra, I'm talking to you. So I actually find, and I want to say it in the most soft and empathic way, I actually find it troubling when there is only one tribe, so to speak, only one people to which you want to deny this right. All of the world's national liberation movements were built on the idea that there is a people, it has a right to self-determination, and there is a state expressing this. Why, of all the people in the world, the Jewish people is not entitled to that right? I just don't get it. And I'm really saying it not as a Jew, as an Israeli, which I am as a fanatic Zionist. I'm asking the question, it's a question of basic fairness. We, after all we've been through, we are the only people that does not deserve a state. Is that right? Is that just? Is that universal justice? So I wish, if we have, when we end this, if we have some time, I'd love to speak to you a bit more, because I think this is a very deep and important conversation, and I'd love to continue.
Yeah, there's a hand back there, and then we'll come over here. Yeah, in the back. You, yeah. That's the one. No, nobody behind you.
I come to you for advice. My name is Yoni. I'm a law student at Northeastern University. It's a pretty humiliating to Israel environment there. I'm a liberal. I'm a liberal Jew. At Northeastern University, every week, there's some program where they bring in a speaker to talk about Israel based on a platform that the notion of an Israeli state, a Jewish state, is just unjust. It starts on the premise that it's racist, that it's apartheid, that it's not a legitimate reason to have a state. And the advice I seek is, I realize that I've kind of, my heart is hardened towards Palestinian suffering because I feel like my identity is constantly under attack. And I just don't know how to respond anymore. I've become more and more right-wing because I just feel torn. I feel like I'm attacked. I feel like there's no legitimate conversation to be had. And my question is do I address the rest of the world, or do I just isolate myself amongst my people and just accept our legitimacy as if we don't need anyone else's approval?
What's your name, please?
Yoni.
Yona?
Yoni.
Yoni. So
And I don't want to have a heart to heart. I want to feel the suffering of other people, but I can't do it at the expense of it only at my identity.
So if Sandra saddened me, you break my heart.
I think this evening's going very well.
And really, thank you for your candid question. I mean, this is the difficult, painful dialogue that I hope we will be having, and I'm happy we're having it, although it is so troublesome. Something went terribly wrong. I mean, the fact that you feel what you feel, you experience what you feel, and I assume it's here, it's not in it's not in some this is where real liberalism and real morality should rule. And I think I answered some of the questions.